All right, now to make this more reusable, first I want to extract this method from this repository and put it somewhere else. The best way to do this is to define this method as an extension method on iQueryable. So first I'm going to create a new folder called extensions. And by the way, one of the students told me how to create a root folder here in VS Code. The funny thing is we have to right click on an empty area, but because I have reduced the size of VS Code to fit in my recording window, I don't have a blank space to right click. So anyway, so here's a new folder. Now in this folder, I'm going to add a new class, iQueryable extensions. This class should be static. Now we go back to our repository and move this method into this new class. First, we need to make it public, static, to make it an extension method. Let's import iQueryable. Now, all extension methods, their first parameter should be this iQueryable of vehicle. So that's the type you're extending, and we call this query. Now, we happen to have another parameter of the same type, so I'm going to remove the other one. Now, let's import the namespaces. So here's our method. We have 3 parameters. The first one is iQueryable of vehicle. So this is the type you're extending. The second is vehicle query, which is our query object. And finally, our dictionary. However, we're still tightly coupled to the concept of vehicles. We cannot reuse this for, let's say, customers. So for that, we want to use generics. I'm going to change this to T and add a generic parameter here, T. Now, if the stuff I'm doing here is confusing to you, I highly recommend you to watch my C# Advanced course on Udemy, because there I have covered generics and extension methods in detail. Next, the first parameter is going to be iQueryable of T instead of vehicle. Now, what about this vehicle query? We don't want to be coupled to the concept of vehicles. Let's go to this vehicle query class. So here we have 2 options. We can create a query class that has these 2 properties, sort by and isSort ascending, and these properties apply to all objects. They're not specific to vehicles. And then we can have this vehicle query derived from query. That's one way. Another option is to use an interface. In this lecture, I'm going to use an interface so you get more comfortable with the concept of interfaces. So back in the extensions folder, I'm going to add a new interface. Call it iQuery object. Now I'm going to go to vehicle query and copy these 2 properties and add them here. Now in interfaces, we don't have access modifiers, so public should go away. And then back to our vehicle query, I'm going to have this class implement iQuery object. Let's import the namespace. Now finally, back to our iQueryable extensions. I'm going to change the second parameter to iQuery object. Now finally, I'm going to change the type of the third parameter to expression of func of T instead of vehicle. And now we have a reusable extension method on iQueryable. So let's go back to our vehicle repository. Now we can use this method like this. So query equals query dot apply ordering. Of course, we need to import the namespace. Now the second parameter here is iQuery object. So we pass query obj. And the second is our dictionary. So columns map. Note that here we have only 2 parameters. It's a cleaner design than the former design. Okay, delete. Now we could use a similar technique to refactor this filtering part, because again, we have some duplicated logic here. So for each property, we're checking to see if that property has a value, and then we apply a filter like that. However, for now, I don't want to get lost in refactoring, because at the end of the day, we still have to deliver this sorting function. We want to make sure this function is working. And next, we want to implement paging. Once we got all these bits working, if there's time left, we can come back, refactor this code, and make it cleaner. All right, finally, let's quickly test this API before we move on to the next step. So if we sort by contact name, in the terminal, you can see this order by statement. So order by contact name, descending, and also by ID. Now, we didn't specifically ask Entity Framework to order our vehicles by ID. So what is this doing here? Well, it turns out that whenever we use this include statements, Entity Framework adds order by ID. Now, honestly, I'm not sure about the rationale behind this, but what you need to know is that if we add ID here, we get this exception. A column has been specified more than once in the order by list. Because Entity Framework automatically adds order by ID, and we're also adding it here, and that's why we get this exception. Now, in a real-world application, it's very unlikely that we want to give the user the ability to sort objects by their ID, because these IDs are internal to the system. So the user might sort our vehicles by their make, model, last update, and so on, but not their IDs. So I'm going to remove this column mapping here. Now let's run this one more time. This time we get a different exception, key not found exception. The given key was not present in the dictionary. So back in our iQueryable extension, we need to specifically count for invalid column names. So in the first line, we want to check for the existence of a key in our columns map. So if columns map contains key of query object that sort by. Now we apply the not operator here. So if you don't have a column with that key, we want to return this query immediately. Let's try this one more time. All right, beautiful. Now if I remove the column name, let's see what happens. We get another exception, argument null exception. So this is another edge case. So we cannot pass null here. So what I'm going to do is something like this. If string is null or white space of query object that sort by, or we don't have a key by that name in our dictionary, we're going to return the query immediately. So one more time. Okay, beautiful. Now what if we totally remove this parameter? Everything works. Sort by an invalid column name. That works too. By contact name. In terminal, we have the right order by statement. And if we add isSort ascending to true, here we see the updated order by statement. Beautiful. So next, we're going to move on to the client-side implementation.